You know, losing a spouse is one of the most profound things anyone can go through. And in the Islamic tradition, there's this specific period for a widow that follows, known as Iddat. It's a time with some very specific guidelines and a lot of deep reflection. But what is it really all about? Today, we're going to dive into its purpose, the rules, and what it all means for a woman's future. Let's get into it.
So this is really the core question we're going to be looking at. And it's about so much more than just a list of rules, right? It's about understanding a framework that's meant to give space for grief, for protection, and, in the end, for a woman's own autonomy. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll define what this waiting period actually is. Then we'll get into the practical, day-to-day rules of conduct. After that, we'll dig into the why, the wisdom behind it all. We'll also touch on the delicate subject of proposals during this time, and we'll wrap up by looking at what comes next, life after Iddat.
Okay, so first things first, let's lay the groundwork. What exactly is this waiting period, and just how long does it last?
So the term we're talking about is Iddat, and really, at its heart, it's this prescribed waiting period after her husband passes away, where the main rule is that she can't remarry during this time.
Right, so how long are we talking about? It's super specific, 4 months and 10 days. And this is a really key point. This is all based on the lunar calendar, not the solar one we use every day. That's a huge deal for getting the timing right, no matter where you are in the world or what era you're in.
And you know what? This rule applies to everyone, all widows, whether they're young or old. It even applies if the marriage was never consummated. But there is one major exception to this. If a widow is pregnant, her iddat is over the second she gives birth. And it doesn't matter if that's a few weeks later or many months down the line.
Okay, so we've got the what and the how long. But what does observing Iddat actually look like day to day? Let's get into the practical guidelines.
And what's fascinating here is the balance it strikes. So on the one hand, the big no-nos are remarriage and what's called beautification. So things like makeup, fancy clothes, jewelry, that kind of thing. The idea is to embrace simplicity. But, and this is important, it's not about letting yourself go. Personal hygiene, bathing, wearing simple and clean clothes, that's all totally fine. Oh, and by the way, that whole thing about wearing a specific color, like black, that's mostly a cultural tradition, not an actual religious requirement.
You see, the whole spirit of Iddat is to create this quiet, reflective space for grieving, which typically means staying home. But obviously, life has to go on. The guidelines are really practical and make clear exceptions for the things you just have to do. Going to the doctor, going to work if you're the sole provider, running essential errands, or even going to school if it means you lose a whole academic year. It really just boils down to one simple idea. Needs come before wants.
All right, now we're getting to the heart of it, the big why. See, in Islamic thought, there's this really important distinction between the reason for a rule and the wisdom behind it.
So on the one side, you have the reason, and that's pretty straightforward. It's a divine command. It's an act of faith. But then on the other side, you have the wisdom, the hikmah. These are all the underlying benefits, the purposes that we can actually understand and see. And the whole principle is you follow the rule because of the reason, even if you can't totally wrap your head around all the wisdom.
So what is some of this wisdom we're talking about? Well, for starters, there's a really practical one. It confirms if a woman is pregnant, which protects the child's lineage. That's huge. Then there's the emotional side. It literally carves out this protected time for grieving, shielding you from the pressure of making huge life decisions. It's time to heal. And this is pretty fascinating. Some scholars and even modern thinkers talk about potential physiological benefits, this idea that the body might actually need time to, well, to reset.
And to really see how unique this is, just look at this comparison. For any other relative, a parent, a sibling, even a child, the absolute maximum period for formal mourning in Islam is just 3 days. So the fact that a widow has this much longer period, it just highlights how significant that marital bond is considered to be and the weight of that loss.
Okay, so this leads us to a pretty delicate topic. What about marriage proposals during this time? The rules here are really nuanced.
While direct explicit proposals are completely off the table. No secret promises, no setting a wedding date for later. The whole point is to protect a woman when she's at her most vulnerable. But what is allowed is pretty interesting. It's all about subtle, indirect hints. So a man might say something really general like, I hope one day to marry a good person. Or maybe, when your waiting period is finished, please do let me know. It's a way of showing respectful interest without being pushy or inappropriate.
And that brings us to our last section, which is, honestly, maybe the most important part of this whole discussion. What happens next? What is life like after Iddat is done?
And this verse from the Quran is absolutely central to understanding this. It's speaking directly to the community, to society, and it says that once that time is up, there is no blame upon you for whatever the women decide to do with their own lives, as long as it's done in an acceptable, honorable way.
I mean, think about what that means. This gives the widow complete and total agency over her own life. She has the absolute right to decide if she wants to remarry or if she wants to stay single. And nobody, not her parents, not her in-laws, nobody has the right to force her one way or the other. This is a powerful, direct challenge to any cultural traditions or superstitions that try to limit a widow's freedom. It puts the power right back where it belongs, in her hands.
And the whole topic is often concluded with this really powerful reminder of God's attributes. He is all aware. He knows what's in everyone's hearts, but also forbearing or patient. And that really sets the tone for how the community should behave, with integrity, with awareness, and with a deep sense of compassion for the widow.
And all of this really leaves us with one final big question to think about. The principles of the faith are so clearly about protection, about healing, and ultimately about empowerment. So the real question for all of us is, how can communities do a better job of closing that gap that sometimes opens up between these beautiful, compassionate principles and the cultural practices that, well, sometimes miss the mark?